Welcome to Newsday on the BBC. I'm Sharon Jitlale in Singapore. The headlines. After Myanmar's military is accused of genocide against the Rohingya, the UN Security Council calls for accountability.
Innocent human beings were raped, murdered, and burned alive for no other reason than their religious and ethnic identity. The whole world is watching what we will do next, and if we will act.
Air pollution may damage the brain and cause a massive drop in intelligence. A shock warning from China.
Hello, I'm Ben Bland in London, also in the programme. The beat goes on. Britain's Prime Minister looks for business in Africa ahead of the Brexit deadline.
R-E-S-P-E-C-T, take care, TCB.
And a final farewell to the Queen of Soul. Fans in Detroit pay their last respects to the legendary Aretha Franklin.
Live from our studios in Singapore and London. This is BBC World News. It's Newsday.
Good morning. It's 8 a.m. here in Singapore, 1 o'clock in London and 8 p.m. in New York, where the UN Security Council is holding an open meeting on Myanmar. Just a day after a UN investigation accused the country's military leaders of crimes against humanity, war crimes and genocide against Rohingya Muslims. The inquiry found evidence of murder, rape and torture against Rohingya, mostly in Myanmar's Rakhine state. Hundreds of thousands have been forced to flee into Bangladesh. Our correspondent Nada Tawfik has more from the UN headquarters in New York.
This was the first time that the Security Council met to discuss this report, which is the strongest yet out of the United Nations. And the Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, said that the Security Council should seriously consider the conclusions in these reports. He said that accountability was necessary for any kind of reconciliation and for stability in the region. And so he really outlined what still needs to be done to get this crisis to be resolved.
It is clear that conditions are not yet met for the safe, voluntary, dignified and sustainable return of Rohingya refugees to their places of origin or choice. And I ask members of the Security Council to join me in urging the Myanmar authorities to cooperate with the United Nations and to ensure immediate, unimpeded and effective access for its agencies and partners. And we must also continue to press for the release of journalists who have been arrested for reporting on this human tragedy.
Well, Cate Blanchett was also in the Security Council chamber. The actor is the UN's Goodwill Ambassador for the Refugee Agency, and she was making an impassioned plea on behalf of the refugees she met in Bangladesh. She traveled there and spoke with women and children who had suffered crimes, had had their villages burned, had seen members of their families killed in front of their eyes. And she told the Security Council that the Rohingya people have been failed by the international community, and it was time to act to make sure that they are protected in the future. And she laid out some of the vivid accounts she heard from those refugee camps.
I have heard the gut-wrenching accounts, stories of grave torture, of women brutally violated, people who have had their loved ones killed before their eyes. Children who have seen their grandparents locked in houses that were set alight. I am a mother, and I saw my own children in the eyes of every single refugee child that I met. I saw myself in every parent. How can any mother endure seeing her child thrown into a fire? Their experiences will never leave me.
Well, Myanmar's representative was also speaking to council members. Myanmar has denied ethnic cleansing. They say that their operation was in response to an attack from Rohingya rebels. He in the council again said that there were numerous attacks that were being ignored by the mainstream media, and he wanted that issue to be brought to the council's attention.
But these facts were conveniently discounted or ignored by mainstream media. The violence attacks were not coincidence. Assad terrorists and their foreign masterminds knew too well that the Myanmar security forces would respond to the attacks with full force. They must also have anticipated the exodus of people from northern Rakhine to Bangladesh. These events were well planned and executed with the support of foreign terrorist organizations.
This debate really laid bare the Council's divisions on Myanmar because China and Russia still believe that this issue needs to be addressed through diplomacy. And that is an issue that Myanmar agrees with. So certainly in the days and weeks to come, when the full report is presented to the Security Council and the world's leaders descend on New York for the UN General Assembly, the conclusions of this report and the issue for the Rohingya people will continue to be addressed by international leaders.
Neda Tawfiq there for us at the United Nations. We'll have plenty more on the Rohingya crisis and the interview with Cate Blanchett for you a little later in the programme. Before that, though, let me round up some of the day's other news for you. Theresa May showed off her best moves to children in Cape Town as she began a three-day visit to Africa. Mrs May says she wanted the UK to be the G7's #1 investor in Africa by 2022, with Britain's private sector companies investing billions. She's called for a new partnership between the UK and Africa after Brexit, based on shared prosperity and job creation.
I want to see strong African economies that British businesses can do business with in a free and fair fashion, whether through creating new customers for British exporters or opportunities for British investors. Our integrated global economy means healthy African economies are good news for British people as well as for African people.
Some of the other main news that's caught our attention today. Google has strongly denied claims by President Trump that its search engine is rigged to make favourable coverage of him difficult to find. Mr. Trump said that Google's search results for Trump News hid conservative and supportive voices. In a statement, Google said its search engine was not biased. Police in India have arrested a number of left-wing activists in connection with what they've described as a Maoist plot to assassinate the Prime Minister Narendra Modi. They were detained following raids in several cities, including Delhi, Mumbai and Hyderabad. The governor of Puerto Rico has acknowledged publicly that the death toll from last year's Hurricane Maria is far higher than the official estimate to date. Authorities say they accept new figures, putting the numbers killed at almost 3,000, up from 64, which had been the original official number. Police in Northern Ireland say a Primark store is now at risk of collapse after being destroyed by a fire. The building in Belfast, which is 5 stories high, dates right back to 1787. More than 100 firefighters attended the scene. Fortunately, everyone was evacuated safely. And Russia has announced that it will hold its biggest military exercise since Soviet times next month. The Defence Minister, Sergei Shoigu, said the Vostok War Games would involve nearly 300,000 troops, 36,000 tanks and more than 1,000 aircraft. Its Northern and Pacific fleets would also be deployed. The exercises will happen over 5 days.
Now, air pollution may cause a drop in intelligence. That's according to new research in China. The 4-year study found that the longer people were exposed to dirty air, the greater the damage to their cognitive abilities. And it seems men are more affected than women are, as our science editor David Schuckman reports.
A wave of pollution rolls into the centre of Beijing. Dirty air is a reality of life for many in China, in fact for billions of people around the world. And scientists now know how it can damage the lungs and the heart, how it can shorten lives. Some of the pollution we breathe in gets trapped in the nose, but tiny particles can slip into the lungs and then make their way into the bloodstream. And there's evidence they can even reach the brain. So pollution may not only have a physical effect, but a mental one as well. To explore what pollution might be doing to the mind, scientists in China embarked on a massive investigation. People's mental abilities can be affected by so many different factors that this task was never going to be easy. This was one of the largest studies of its kind. It looked at levels of air pollution in dozens of cities across China and at the results of tests of verbal reasoning and maths taken by 25,000 people in those places. The researchers conclude that long-term exposure to air pollution impedes cognitive performance. That is a bold claim, and it doesn't provide direct evidence of cause and effect, but it does follow a few other studies that have also suggested that polluted air may affect the brain. So a link is thought to be possible. We asked one of Britain's leading pollution scientists to look at the Chinese research, and he says it's another red flag warning that pollution may undermine mental ability.
What they find is that older men were more susceptible. Other studies have shown that older women. So there's a few things that we need to resolve, but certainly those red flags, there's more of them, and it just adds to the weight of evidence that air pollution has a wide range of effects in your body.
This matters because most of the world's population lives in air that's polluted. India, for example, has some of the dirtiest conditions. And as the research into pollution advances, and we learn more about the impacts, it may turn out to be that they're not only physical, but mental as well. Air pollution is a threat from Africa to here in Britain. And its true implications may only become obvious in the decades ahead. David Shookman, BBC News.
Well, Assistant Professor Shi Chen from the Yale School of Public Health is one of the authors of the report, and on the line from Beijing, he told me more about his findings.
This study builds up from the previous study, and is quite innovative in terms of we look at all age cohorts. Previously, people more focused on children or the elderly, but we say that the effect develops along age, so it gets even worse when people get older, and there's a clear gender pattern in the effect. And this is also missing in the previous study. But gender pattern is very important. We find a larger impact, much larger impact for men compared to for women. So this could have implications even for the labor market, because people are taking high-stake exams. If during polluted days they are taking those exams, and they are affecting males and females differently, that may affect the allocative efficiency of the labor market. And we also find that affect people differently, especially for people who are more vulnerable and who receive lower education. Right. So this is also worrisome because, as we know, the environmental stressors may enlarge the social inequality. And if that's the case, then the government should address this as one of the agenda in addressing the
really fascinating study, Professor Chen. As you say, men being impacted more by this than women. And obviously the fear that air pollution causes mental as well as physical damage is hugely worrying when you take into account that 91% of the world's population actually lives in places where air quality exceeds guideline limits, according to WHO. So what can ordinary people do about this? How can people protect their children in cities that are polluted?
So this is the worrisome part from this report, because we not only find short-term effect, but long-term effect. So if there's only short-term effect, then people can take more effective actions, like wear face masks, install air filters. But if it is long-term, then people have to stay outdoor every day sometime. So that means they cannot totally avoid this impact. So that means the government should take more responsibility to clean the air, because that will have long-term consequence.
That's right. You speak of the government there, Professor Chen, and we know that your president, Xi Jinping, declared war on pollution just a few years ago, but we know the problem is still rife in many Chinese cities. So how will you use this report to lobby for less pollution?
I think the things are getting better, and according to the official statistics, the Chinese air quality is improving by 30%. So that's a very good signal, and I think there are a lot of good opportunities for us to further clean the air. And I think the deeper the way we go, and the more difficult, because the first mile is the easiest way to go, but the last mile is more difficult. But there are some chance to do that. For example, the Beijing will host another Olympic Games. Right. That may be a very important opportunity to lobby this. And also in China, people care more and more about their health. And there's a national blueprint called Healthy China 2030. Basically, everyone is more focusing on their health behavior and the health in their daily life.
And that was Assistant Professor Shi Chen from the Yale School of Public Health talking to me just a short time ago. Well, you're watching Newsday on the BBC. Still to come on the programme, actress and UN Goodwill Ambassador Cate Blanchett tells the BBC of her emotional meeting with Rohingya refugees.
Also coming up in the programme, thousands of Aretha Franklin fans have gathered in Detroit to pay their last respects to the Queen of Soul.
He's the first African-American to win the presidential nomination of a major party, and he accepts exactly 45 years ago to the day that Martin Luther King declared, "I have a dream."
As darkness falls tonight, an unfamiliar light will appear in the southeastern sky, an orange glowing disk that's brighter than anything save the moon, our neighbouring planet, Mars.
There is no doubt that this election is an important milestone in the birth of East Timor as the world's newest nation.
It'll take months and billions of dollars to repair what Katrina achieved in just hours.
3 weeks is the longest the great clock has been off duty in 117 years. So it was with great satisfaction that clockmaker John Vernon swung the pendulum to set the clock going again.
Welcome back. You're watching Newsday on the BBC. I'm Sharon Lail in Singapore.
Good to have you with us. Hi, I'm Ben Bland in London. Our top stories. After Myanmar's military is accused of genocide against the Rohingya, the UN Security Council calls for accountability.
And new research in China and the US claims air pollution causes a significant reduction in intelligence. And the longer the exposure, the worse it gets. Let's take a look now at some of the front pages from around the world. We can begin with the front page of the Japan Times, which is dominated by Japan's assessment of the threat from North Korea. The Defense Ministry says despite recent US-North Korea summits and the ensuing denuclearization talks, the threat posed by a nuclear-armed North Korea remains unchanged. It warns that Pyongyang already has hundreds of missiles that could reach Japan, and they may have succeeded in producing small nuclear warheads to potentially fit onto those missiles. Let's take a look at the Philippine Star now, because it reports on a new complaint against the country's president. For the first time, relatives of victims of extrajudicial killings have filed a complaint before the International Criminal Court that President Duterte's war on drugs amounts to crimes against humanity. And finally, we always hear stories about the durability of plastics and how it pollutes the environment, but the international edition of the New York Times has a story that talks about the transitory nature of plastics. Layers of plastic in spacesuits worn by Neil Armstrong. He's, of course, the first man to walk on the moon. They're turning brittle with age. So the conservationists are in a race to save these artifacts for the history of humanity. And that brings you up to date with some of the papers.
Well, as we've been reporting, UN investigators urged the Security Council to refer the situation in Myanmar to the International Criminal Court. The actress Cate Blanchett, in her role as the UN Refugee Agency's Goodwill Ambassador, spoke exclusively to the BBC's Neda Tawfiq and said that council members must fulfil their duty to protect the Rohingya people.
Well, I think that they're, part of the Security Council's remit is to highlight and to continually, unfailingly, not give up. You know, just coming from speaking to the Secretary General, you know, when a situation is impossible, you have to push harder. You know, and despair is something that we cannot give into. And when you see the resilience of the refugees themselves, when you sit in a school with children who have lost parents, you know, children who have seen their grandparents pushed back into burning buildings and when set on fire. You know, I sat with one particular girl who was 14 who had her 3-year-old brother dismembered and thrown into a fire in front of her. And when you see them, you know, moving forward positively, trying to go to school, it galvanizes me and makes me want to not forget those individual faces in the magnitude of the numbers that we hear. And I think it's really, it's beholden upon the international community to shine the spotlight on it. It may seem impossible, but it's not an excuse for not doing anything.
Have you been disappointed that Aung San Suu Kyi, as the de facto leader and as with her moral authority as a Nobel Peace Prize laureate, hasn't done more to prevent the violence?
I think it's imperative that the government of Myanmar now sets about concrete paths towards giving the Rohingya citizenship. It's, you know, every human being has a, you know, we're sitting here, we have a nationality, you know, we're able to vote, you know, we have the right to an education and basic health care, and these people have none of those rights. And so I think it's absolutely vital that the government of Myanmar now, you know, a year on from the crisis, starts to make positive, concrete steps towards making sure that things happen. It's you know, of paramount importance.
And after visiting the camps, being here to speak to international leaders, I wonder, have you reflected at all on the fact that there had been warning signs for decades, incitement of violence against the Rohingya for decades, and yet international leaders did not prevent this from happening?
I think when we're dealing with a stateless people, the problem can often be invisible, and you can feel, you know, particularly in the West, that there's cultural barriers. But when you sit with a mother newly arrived who's not even unpacked her bags because she's worried that the latrine that she's built, you know, right above her is going to collapse when the rains come. You realise that there are human beings inside this crisis, and I think it's really important that even though we talk about the numbers, that we don't lose sight of the human beings. And so I suppose part of my role as a Goodwill Ambassador is to rescore that human face.
Actress and UN Goodwill Ambassador Cate Blanchett speaking there. Now, thousands of fans of Aretha Franklin have been paying their last respects to the Queen of Soul in her hometown of Detroit. Aretha Franklin's body is lying in an open casket for 2 days at the city's African American History Museum. Regini Vajanardan joined the crowds celebrating her life.
The moment I wake up, before I put on my makeup, I say a little prayer for you.
For fans of Aretha Franklin, it's been the ultimate pilgrimage.
What you want, baby, I got it. What you need, you know I got it.
Crowds lined up from the early hours as they waited to say a final farewell to their beloved Queen of Soul. But before she said goodbye, she made one last entrance. Ever the diva, a white vintage Cadillac transported her in a golden casket. For those waiting patiently to see her, the mood here was melodic, not morose.
R-E-S-P-E-C-T, that's just what it means to me. R-E-S-P-E-C-T, take care, TCB.
Why have you decided to queue up here to pay your last respects?
I couldn't have did it for a better person. She is all of that and a bowl of soup.
I'm honoring her today. You know, she means a lot to me, my family, you know, to everyone. She is the Queen of Soul, but she paved the way for a lot of black singers. And the D has turned it up for Aretha.
Aretha Franklin will lie in state at the city's African American Museum for another day. Her style, her grace, and her ruby red heels on show for one last time.
It was beautiful. She looks like she was just sleeping. She had on red shoes. Her dress was so elegant. She looks really pretty. Her face is just like she was relaxed.
Aretha Franklin will be remembered as America's voice in more ways than one. She fought for gender and racial equality, supported charities and communities she cared about, and remains a role model to so many in Detroit and beyond. She was a global superstar who never forgot her hometown roots. This week, her hometown is showing the world they'll never forget Aretha Franklin.
Oh, the Queen of Soul there. Ben, you must have a favourite Aretha Franklin song.
Oh, there are so many good ones to choose from, but it's got to be the classic, Say a Little Prayer for You. What about you, Sharonjit?
I love Respect. It's all about a little respect here on Newsday.
Absolutely, good choice. You've been watching Newsday on the BBC. I'm Ben Bland in London.
And I'm Sharonjit Lail here in Singapore. We'll be back with Asia Business Report.
Yeah, before we go, though, I want to show you these pictures. It's a plane. Well, landing's never easy, and if it's something you always dread, you might not enjoy this. The ANA flight was trying to land at Tokyo Airport during Typhoon Cimarron last week, which caused winds of up to 200 kilometres an hour throughout Japan. As you can see, the pilot had some trouble with the initial descent, but eventually managed to touch down safely. That's all. We'll see you soon.
Hello, Wednesday starts with a bit of umbrella weather across some parts of the UK, but it should turn drier and sunnier for many of us as the day goes on. Two weather systems to talk about early on. This one clipping parts of southeast England and East Anglia with either showers or some rain, could be some heavier bursts. And this one moving out of Scotland and Northern Ireland and taking some increasingly light and patchy rain further south through England and Wales. Starting temperatures, double figures for England and Wales, but something fresher for Scotland and Northern Ireland. It is less humid behind this weather front, and there will be some sunshine around. A few showers pushing into northwest Scotland, maybe the odd one to the west of Northern Ireland. Rain clears East Anglia and the southeast, lunchtime at the very latest, and then our weakening weather front takes a few late day showers towards this part of the world. Sunny spells develop elsewhere in England and Wales. Here's a look at things at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and on the breeze, a feed of a few showers into northwest Scotland, but most other parts here in Scotland, and indeed in Northern Ireland, will be dry. You may just catch the odd shower in the west. Good sunny spells developing across northern England, Wales, the Midlands, and into the southwest. But our weakening weather front, with still maybe the odd shower associated with it, moves into East Anglia and the southeast towards the end of the day, but hardly any rain left really. And then it clears away, and then we've got clearing skies. There may just be the odd patch of mist and fog as we go into Thursday morning, but overnight into Thursday, our weather systems have cleared away, clearing skies, and temperatures dip away. Much cooler night to come going into Thursday morning, mid to low single figures in some spots. Under those clearing skies, reason for that, we've got an area of high pressure starting to build into the UK, which means although it's chilly first thing on Thursday, there will be plenty of sunshine to come. First thing, may not last all day. You see the land here showing that we've got clear skies. So go deeper into Thursday, you can see some clouds starting to build. It may produce the odd shower, maybe more so into western Scotland. Most will be dry, just expect a bit more cloud to come, but still some sunny spells and temperatures high teens to a few into the low 20s. So once we get past that chance of umbrella weather in the day ahead, for the rest of the week it is looking mainly dry, but do note again the nights will be chillier. And then as we go into the weekend, we will see a feed of cloud coming into western parts of the UK that may produce a bit of patchy rain. The emphasis is on, though, plenty of dry weather. And as the weekend goes on, it will start to warm up a little bit too. That's your latest forecast.
Now here's the science bit.
Ready. Could a bendy phone be the future?
There really is no driver. Oh, I feel better for that.
Click. Saturday and Sunday at 12:30 on the BBC News Channel.
والله بنحضر أبغى كلار وما بقى نعرف وين نروح بحالنا.
Our World is a unique series of films on the BBC.
I want to be able to bring her home.
Offering personal insights into global events. Our World, stories that speak for themselves. Saturday and Sunday nights at 9:30 on the BBC News Channel.
Hello, I'm Ben Bland with BBC News. Our top story. The UN Security Council's been holding an open meeting on Myanmar. It comes the day after UN investigators accused Myanmar's military leaders of crimes against humanity and genocide. The UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres said those found responsible must be held to account. A new study from China finds air pollution is causing a huge drop in our intelligence. Researchers believe the negative impact increases with age and affects men with less education worst. And this video is trending on bbc.com. This ANA flight was trying to land at Tokyo's Narita airport during a typhoon last week. Winds were up to 200 kilometers an hour throughout Japan. As you can see, the pilot had some trouble with the initial descent, but eventually got everyone down safely. And our top story here in the UK, allegations by the former chief rabbi Jonathan Sachs that Jeremy Corbyn is anti-Semitic have been met with an angry response from the Labour Party. Time now to join Sharonjit for all the business news.
UK Trade Secretary Liam Fox tells the BBC there's interest in a good deal between Britain and Europe when it comes to Brexit. And is China doing enough to address the problem of air pollution, which claims hundreds of thousands of lives each year? We take a look. Hello and welcome to Asia Business Report. I'm Sharonjit Lail. And Brexit, or the UK's exit from the European Union, is now about 7 months away. But the two sides have yet to agree on what kind of exit that will be. Now, last week, the UK Chancellor Philip Hammond highlighted again a scenario where the UK economy could lose more than 7% of GDP over the next 15 years if the UK were to leave the EU bloc without a deal. The BBC's Asia business correspondent Karishma Vaswani sat down with UK Trade Secretary Liam Fox to get his latest response.
What we can say, I think with some certainty, is that if we get no deal, there will be disruption for the UK economy. I think it's difficult to quantify that, but that's not what we want. And what we've been making very clear is we want there to be a good deal between Britain and Europe. And just remember that the European Union has a £100 billion a year surplus in goods trade with the UK. What would that mean if we had no deal? That would mean that European countries would have to pay about £14 billion a year to access the UK market. It's not just that it's not in Britain's interests for there to be no deal, it's not in Europe's interests either.
So on the no deal, you have previously said that you would put a no deal, the odds of that at about 60-40. Is that how you feel today?
Well, I mean, it's difficult to be scientific about these things. What I think is that there's an increased focus on the need to get an agreement with the United Kingdom. That doesn't mean that necessarily we would get one. This is not just a debate between Britain and the European Union. It has a global context. And if there are impediments to trade and investment that appear in Europe as a consequence of this process, it will send a signal to the rest of the world's investors about how open Europe is for business.
And just finally on the China issue, how much would the UK perhaps be willing to compromise on intellectual property to be able to get more access to the Chinese market in the event of a free trade agreement?
Well, what we've said is that our commitment is to a free and open trading system. And we have said that issues like intellectual property are extremely important, and the protection we give on IP in the UK is one of the reasons why we get so many startups in the UK and why even you'll get Chinese companies coming to London on the basis of the IP protection that they get. So we're not likely to want to trade away our crown jewels.
UK's Trade Secretary Liam Fox speaking to Karishma Vaswani there. Meanwhile, Canada's Foreign Minister is in Washington, D.C., and that is to resume talks about the future of the North American Free Trade Agreement. Yesterday, the US and Mexico made a breakthrough in their efforts to establish new terms of the treaty. The Trump administration said it would give Canada until Friday to iron out its differences. If not, the US and Mexico have hinted that they'll move on without Canada. President Donald Trump has stepped up attacks on big tech firms, warning Facebook, Google and Twitter to be careful after slamming what he called rigged internet search results. Mr. Trump offered no details on what, if any, actions he might take, but a top White House aide suggested the administration may look at some types of regulation to the president's complaints. A North America technology reporter Dave Lee says Google wasted little time in responding to the president's comments.
Google was pretty quick off the mark after the president's tweets early in the morning. Google said in a statement that search is not used to set a political agenda, and it added that we don't bias our results towards any political ideology. There are many, many factors that go into what does appear in a Google search, around 200 different things that can influence the ranking of various websites. But Google, as I say, pretty firm in saying that politics isn't a part of that equation.
North American technology reporter Dave Lee there. Now, the 18th Asian Games are underway in Indonesia, where tens of thousands of people are attending events in Jakarta and Palembang. Now, the Southeast Asian country is estimated to have spent over $2 billion building up infrastructure for the event. Indonesia stepped up to the plate after Vietnam won the bid but withdrew from hosting duties because the Games became too expensive. So, how much does it cost to stage an event like this? Well, here's what we can tell you. For Rio de Janeiro, the 2016 Summer Olympics cost Brazil more than $13 billion, a far cry from the original estimates of $4.6 billion. And Russia's cost of hosting the FIFA World Cup this summer reportedly exceeded $14 billion. So, is the investment a winning strategy for Indonesia? A sports marketing expert Sasi Kumara says there are intangible assets like good publicity.
I think when you look at that from that perspective, whether they can break even, when it comes to the numbers, they absolutely make no sense whatsoever. You don't have to be a rocket scientist to figure that out, or a financial analyst. But then again, you look at what's happening in Indonesia, in Palembang. The local municipal council has dished out over thousands of small micro loans to small businesses, helping them cope with the influx of visitors in their country.
Right.
All of a sudden, they can now step up their operations. So the recreation and hospitality industry really benefits from hosting such major events.
Yeah, so when I think of Jakarta, I think of terrible traffic. I mean, this is a city that desperately needs infrastructure. Should they be spending the infrastructure on perhaps stadiums that may only be used a handful of times?
I don't think so. They have built purpose-built stadiums. The money has not really gone into really building more stadiums. They have enough stadiums across, especially in Jakarta. You are right there when you talk about the traffic. I think it's the number one thing that comes to anyone's mind when you talk about Jakarta. But there are some road infrastructure that's being built. Though I haven't been there in the last 6 months, I used to go there almost every week. And you can see a lot of constructions going on there. But at the end of the day, I think, like I mentioned, I think the core reason why they're hosting is it is now creating that interest and also the confidence, investor confidence in Indonesia and Jakarta.
And that was sports marketing expert Sasi Kumar. Now, breathing in toxic air isn't just bad for your lungs. A new study reveals chronic exposure to air pollution can cause a drop in intelligence and harm cognitive performance. According to the study, pollution also increases the risk of degenerative diseases like Alzheimer's and other forms of dementia. Now, it's a big problem across Asia, but one of the worst offenders is China, where air pollution kills over 350,000 people a year. Locals say government measures have helped reduce pollution, but are they actually enough? They need current reports from Beijing.
A blanket of smoke enveloping Beijing last year. Engineer Johannes Lawson was not happy with local air purifiers. So he built his own and turned it into a business.
We build a purifier that, first of all, have enough capacity to handle a whole home, so 100, 150 square meters, and it manages all the rooms. There's a 4-core computer sitting inside the purifier managing it and keeping an eye on the environment, making sure everything is all right.
As these pictures travel across the world and smog takes a toll on public health, the government has taken strong measures.
At amber level, there are certain restrictions placed on factories nearby Beijing, as well as government use of vehicles. And when you get to a red level, we'll switch from the 1 day per week restriction on all vehicle license plates to odd and even. So 50% of cars will be removed from the roads. And if there are big government events on, like an APEC summit or a G7 leaders meeting, often they'll do the major changes like shutting schools, shutting factories, taking cars off the road, and that really helps to bring down the air pollution level.
You would find these electric charging points across Beijing to charge cars and taxis. Locals say they have seen a drop in the level of pollution in the last couple of years, and they credit electric vehicles as one of the reasons for that drop. But these electric cars run on energy produced by coal, imported and used by China in a huge quantity.
The electricity used by cars is produced out of burnt coal. China's coal is of poor quality and produces plenty of smoke. China imports coal from Indonesia and Australia or adds coke to reduce smoke. China has also installed washeries.
Experts say China would need to overcome its dependence on coal to contain pollution. But that would not be easy, considering the rising demand for energy from an expanding population and economy. Vineet Khare, BBC News, Beijing.
And that report ends this edition of Asia Business Report. I'm Sharanjit Lale here in Singapore. Thanks for watching.
Now, BBC News, the top stories this hour. After Myanmar's military is accused of genocide against the Rohingya, the UN Security Council calls for accountability. New research in China and in the US claims air pollution causes a significant reduction in intelligence. The longer the exposure, the worse it gets. Now, for more than 3 weeks this summer, flames devoured moorland across parts of northwest England at the height of the summer heat wave. Some 6,000 acres were affected. Our correspondent Danny Savage has returned to the scene to find out how local farmers have coped since and to see what effect it all had on the wildlife there.
The desperate days of high summer on the roof of England. Several square miles of Pennine moorland burned for days. It was difficult to contain and left a thick pall of smoke hanging over vast areas of Greater Manchester. In the thick of it, farmers took dangerous risks to rescue their livestock, dodging the flames to find their animals. The survivors now graze on the lower slopes. Their owners are still working out where to go from here.
It was quite shocking at the time because the fire was raging worse than any fire I'd ever seen before in my life.
Claire says the sheep ran for their lives and ended up scattered over a huge area.
We had a big team of farmers come from miles and miles away to come and help us get the sheep off at the time, and still now we're getting phone calls from farmers miles away saying we've got a few more of your sheep. They've turning up in various places.
Just devastation.
9 weeks on from the fires, the gamekeeper here has lost most of the moorland he manages.
Very depressing, yeah. And then to pick yourself up and go forward on it, you know, so sad. The only thing that's keeping me going at the minute is this is all coming back. You know, the other is reshooting. You know, if we can get it all back together again, it'd be good.
How many years will it take to get back to where it was?
Some of this, 4 years. Other bits, probably 20 years.
That long?
Yeah.
It's estimated that about 7 square miles above Stalybridge was destroyed. The RSPB manage part of the area and are seeing rejuvenation on the fire boundary.
The minute you go into these damper gullies, the fire just jumped over these areas and they are really still growing green, and so there's been quite a patchwork of areas unaffected, actually.
A few days of fire changed the look of this countryside for decades to come. The great scars no longer smoulder, they now have to heal. Danny Savage, BBC News, Stalybridge.
Don't forget, you can reach me and most of the team here on social media. I'm on there at Ben M. Bland. This is BBC News. It's time now to get all the latest sports news in Sport Today.